And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another high vibe conversation. I'm your host, Shel Shapiro. With me today, we've got Linda Vetrus-Nichols, Dorrit Carlson, Stina Marie, Jenny Langren, and today's special guest is Todd Cherches. Todd, we're so excited to have you here to talk all about the power of visual leadership. And I wonder if you could take a moment to introduce yourself to anyone who's new here and who needs to know you.
Thank you, Shel. It's great to be here with everyone, coming to you live from New York City. Todd Cherches. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumball. We're a management and leadership consulting, training, and executive coaching firm. I'm also an adjunct professor of leadership at NYU and Columbia, and I'm a TEDx speaker, and I'm the author of the book Visual Leadership, leveraging the power of visual thinking in leadership and in life. So that's my little bio.
I love it. I love it. Before we get more into today's conversation, I want to remind everybody that this is a safe space. We invite you to share with us as we talk through our life lessons and hold space for you to work through yours. So what this means is whether you are catching us live or joining us on a replay, if you are vibing with what we're saying, if you resonate, if you want to add to the conversation, insert your own thoughts, insights, tips, continue the conversation in any way, please feel free to share with us in the chat. And if you want to share with us, but you feel like you want to do that in a more one-to-one setting, you are invited to do that as well. This is the link on your screen where you can schedule your individual high vibe conversation with the high vibe lady of your choosing. I will pop this back up at the end of the discussion as well in case you want that link again. And if you are new here or just want to catch up on some of the replays from previous conversations, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel seen on your screen. We want to have more high vibe conversations for you, and this is where you can access them. So with that being said, the power of visual leadership. Todd, I'm really looking forward to kicking this conversation off with you. I just watched your TED Talk yesterday, so I'm a little bit up to speed now about like all the things that you do. And I feel like I've got like a pretty good sense of like what visual leadership means to me, but what does it mean to you?
I'd love to hear what it means to you first.
Well, I'll dive into that for
you can see that's the professor in me pushing it back onto you. So
it is, and I certainly do that a lot too, with my clients when we have conversations. Visual leadership for me like goes back to my graphic design and my creative, like my training really. Ever since, and even before that, ever since I was a little kid, like I always tried to find a way to express myself creatively, visually, like put pen to paper, put ink on a canvas, like all the different ways. And so, especially growing up in a way where I felt silenced from my voice, being able to communicate visually was really, really important. And even if that was just for myself, to be able to get my thoughts and ideas out, I always just use that as an outlet. So visual leadership for me then translates into, well, how do I say things better? How do I show things better? And am I communicating what I think I am to other people now that I'm putting it in front of other people for them to see? Am I doing this in the most effective way? And I think that lends itself nicely into what you help people do. But I'm going to turn that question back around again. Yeah, what does it mean for you?
Yeah, that was great. I love hearing that because everyone sees visual leadership through a different lens, right? So that's one of the foundational concepts. In fact, just to hold the rainbow colored eye on my book represents the fact that just as no one in the world actually has a rainbow colored eye that I've ever seen, no one in the world sees the world through the same exact lens that you do. Even if you're identical twins, my father and my uncle were identical twins, yet they still saw the world through a different paradigm, right? So we all see the world through a different lens based on our life experiences, our education, our interests, our culture, all of those kinds of things. So visual leadership is the application of visual thinking and visual communication methodologies to the practice of management and leadership. And that's in all contexts. So it's not just if you're the head of a company or something. We all need to manage and lead our own lives. So we're all managers and leaders. So it applies to anyone and everyone in that way. So it's meant to be totally inclusive. And one of the main things that we want to do in life, as you described, Shell, is how do you get people to see what you're saying? How do you get an idea that's so crystal clear in your mind's eye, which is a term coined by Shakespeare in Hamlet, when he didn't know if the ghost of his father was an apparition or a figment of his imagination. We all have pictures in our head of how we see the world, how we would like the world to be, ideas, innovations. Our challenge as leaders is to get that idea out of our heads and out there into the world, and visual leadership is a methodology that I can get into shortly of how we do that. So that's my short answer to what visual leadership is all about at its foundation.
It didn't need to be a short answer. You can expand on that at any point. But I love how we're getting into it.
The comment or jump in on how that resonates with you, or that helps to bring it to life. Or I'm happy to share what I call my 4 ways to think and communicate more visually, if you'd like to hear those.
Yeah, let's hear them. Why not?
Right. So why visuals? I always break it in my TED Talk. I talk about attention, comprehension, and retention. So when you use visual imagery or visual language, it helps people it captures their attention by getting them to focus. It helps to create understanding or enhance understanding, and it helps people to remember, because we are, as humans, we are wired visually, right? We think in pictures, even if we think we don't. Some people say, oh, I'm visual, or I'm not visual, or I'm creative, or I'm not creative, or I suffer from ICD, which I do, which is I can't draw syndrome. Even if you are not a great artist, you could be an artist in your own way. You could use props, you can use pictures, you can use PowerPoint slides. So there's a lot of different ways to use visual communication. In fact, a common question that people ask is, what about, does this apply to people who are blind or sight impaired? And the answer is definitely yes, because we could still use visual language. We could still create a mental movie in the minds of others. We could paint a picture with words. So it is an inclusive methodology. It's not just for people who can see. And the 4 categories, just to get to those, are: 1 is using visual imagery and or props, or anything information you take in with the eye. Category 2 is using mental models and frameworks. Category 3 is using metaphor and analogy, and category 4 is using storytelling and humor. So those are kind of my 4 buckets. And when used in combination, it's even more effective. And I have a million examples I can share. So that's just, that would be just the tip of the iceberg as a metaphor, right? It's a visual image, but what does a tip of the iceberg as an expression mean? It means what we see and know is only a small percentage of what else is out there, right? Or down there. So we use metaphors and analogies and visual language all the time. We may not realize it. So hopefully when people watch my TED Talk or read my book or listen to this conversation, they'll start to see and realize, oh, I already do that, or I need to do that more, or this person does that really well. And while I focus on the visuals, there are the 4 senses that we use, not just the 5, we use all of our senses, but in teaching, there's something called VARK, visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. Those are not learning styles. Some people say, oh, I'm just this or I'm just that. Those are 4 methodologies for getting our ideas out there into the world. So visual would be what you can see. Auditory is what you could hear. Reading and writing is self-explanatory. And kinesthetic is through movement, feel, and touch. How do you communicate? So when I teach and train and coach, I try to incorporate all 4 of those methodologies into what I'm doing. While my focus is on the visual, I try to incorporate all the senses to help maximize the impact of what we're talking about.
Thank you. I love the way you're breaking it down. And I believe in your TED Talk you also mentioned that it was kind of like playing a game of Pictionary or categories, or trying to describe something to somebody, charades.
So even people who aren't great artists can still play Pictionary and draw a shape or a stick figure and communicate visually. But in order to communicate visually, you need to think visually. You need to think, all right, how can I visually represent this idea? And also playing charades, right? We use hand signals and 2 words sounds like, right? So we use body language, facial expression, and drawing and other methodologies all the time. So for example, I keep this on my desk to remind me to always be curious, always ask why, always dig deeper. I keep Gumby on my desk to remind me to always be flexible and bend over backwards to serve my clients. I tell my clients, you need to do the work. There's no magic wand. You can't just wave a magic wand and wish something to happen. You actually have to work at it. I could do this for hours. So if you don't do this, if you don't update your skills, you're going to become a dinosaur and quickly go extinct. So again, so we need to expand our minds to create space to think more visually. If we're closed-minded and said this doesn't work for me, you're not going to be able to be a visual thinker. So that is the elephant in the room that we are addressing today. So I will stop there because otherwise I could just do that for the next few hours.
I love that you have so many props readily available to you on your desk. It's magic. Linda, I'm coming over to you now. Have you ever used any visual leadership when you were working with kids previously?
I was in an organization called Bible Study Fellowship in Minnesota, and then I moved to Connecticut, and the training there was really different because we were being taught how to do visual imagery within a story, and I absolutely loved it. It wasn't something that came natural to me, and I would just like, if anything, to go back to that training again, because it really did help get the Bible stories across to even 2.5-year-olds. So so that's what I thought of is when Todd was, kind of listing them all out. And Dorit's really great with like she talks about it's the little things, and it's those little things that you do in a marriage. Those are like the logs that you put on the fire to keep that marriage hot. And of course, we all know she uses a great deal of humor in her communication. So that's what came up for me. Thanks for the breakdown, Todd. That was really helpful.
Thank you, Linda.
I was going to say, building on what Linda said, we should use, when we tell stories and use metaphors, we want to think about who's our audience and what's going to resonate with them. So, for example, if I'm talking to Doris, she just mentioned Norway, we're talking about skiing, I might use skiing as a metaphor. If I'm talking to Stina, who I don't know, but I see all those guitars in the background, I may use metaphors related to music, right? So we need to always think about the metaphors and stories, not that resonate with us, but that resonate with our audiences. So I use a lot of baseball analogies because I'm a big baseball fan. Go Yankees, even though they didn't make the playoffs this year. But if I'm talking to someone from Europe, I might use soccer or football. If I'm talking to someone from Australia, I might use rugby. Or if I'm talking, tennis is universal, right? So you want to always speak the language of your stakeholders, because otherwise you will alienate them and disconnect with them rather than connect with them. So that's a key point to keep in mind too, that there's no one size fits all. And that's where the creativity really kicks in when you think about, all right, how can I meet this person where they live, not necessarily where I live.
Yeah, and that was the brilliant thing that Jesus would do, is speak in parables and, speak in the language of who he was in front of. That was very cool. I learned a lot studying the Bible, even as literature in high school. That was one of my favorite courses.
Yeah, I love what you've said, Todd, as well, about like looking around at like, or picking up on the visual cues of like Stina's guitars, or like knowing that you just had like a brief moment of a conversation about Norway with Dorit, and like all the different things, like you're picking up on like subtle little cues that can dictate like how you interact with that person, especially when you're first getting to know them. And this is something that I show people how to do a lot when we go through their LinkedIn profiles, or like when they're vetting other people, to like notice the connections, like what are the connecting threads, or like, did you go to the same school? Do you have any mutual connections? Are you in the same geographic location? Do you have similar interest? Are you in any other groups together? Like pick up on things that you can relate to them on, or that you're curious about. And like, then when you go to message them or interact and engage on their posts, like you're more just like naturally curious, because like, okay, I might not know this person fully yet, but here's what I do see about them, and here's where I'm interested to learn more. So like picking up on those visual cues can be really helpful to like get that conversation and that relationship like started, and build a fire underneath it. Since we were talking about building a fire before. Dorit, I'm coming down to you now. I want to hear your thoughts on the power of visual leadership. What's coming up for you?
Thank you, Shell. This is such an interesting topic to me, because I'm completely green here. I've never been working in an environment where there has been a lot of leadership. I've been working mostly in sales in different kinds of shops, selling everything from high-end creams and makeup and perfumes to hamsters and pet supplies. So for me, the customer relations have always been most important. And those places where I worked here in a little town in Norway hasn't been like 50 employees or anything. It's been like 2, 3, 4 maybe, you know? So for the last 10 years before I had a complete burnout, I worked in a pet shop. And most of the time we were like 3, 4 people maximum. And the leader, well, the boss that I had wasn't very visual. It was more facts, like this. And when I tried to, when he left for months to go on vacation with his wife, as he did, and left me with the shop, I tried to teach the new people in a way that I would have liked things to be explained, you know, and it's easier to see it than to just hear it, especially when it comes to how to deal with the animals. You know, how do you catch one of the birds? I can tell a long story about that, but it's so much easier for me to just show it. You know, you just do this and put it in there, you know? So all my life I've heard my stories, or if I'm gonna tell something about anything, just facts. This is what this was what happened to me today, you know? My dear husband, he is very fact oriented. He cringes when I start telling something, because I put in so much in his ears, useless information, and I can just see him just changing color, and he's like, isn't she just gonna come to the point soon, you know? So that's just that's just me when I'm explaining. I'm it's like Linda says, I'm picking and I'm putting metaphors and I'm trying to put a little humor in it, and a lot of stuff like that, because that's how I see the world. So many facets, and it's just wonderful to try to convey my little world that I have going on in here to the rest of the world. Yeah. So that's how I see the visual leadership from my little side of the globe.
That's great. I kept picturing a hamster with lipstick on as you were talking. So I was doing a mashup of those two different images.
Oh yeah, but you should have smelled them. They smelled delicious.
Yeah. But, you know, we're talking about leadership in different areas, but definitely in sales. I mean, sales, there's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of when you're dealing with people who only like facts. We need to keep our stories short, right? So, with a husband, we have to tolerate each other for spouses. But if you're talking to a customer who only wants the facts, telling a long story may not be the best way to go. It may be like one quick metaphor or a short story. So I think that's a great reminder to modify our preferred way of presenting or communicating to our audience or the recipient. But like you were talking about, when you're teaching or training or coaching, using storytelling and metaphors and showing, not just telling, is a powerful way of getting that attention, comprehension, and retention, and getting things to stick. So that's a great example to it.
Absolutely, and just listing things for a coaching client will not stick. Right. They need to feel it, and to do that best, it's way better to get the stories out. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Great point, Todd.
Yeah, Dora talks about the love languages, and she talks about how and she has great stories about her kids even, and their different ways that they see that they're being loved and receiving love, and how she switched it up to matching that need for them. That was very cool.
Great.
Even the way that you were describing and telling the story about your husband and like describing how he was turning colors and like looked at, like, and you could see the visual changes and the visual cues there, like the way that you described that and communicated that to us now, like I could picture myself in that scenario too. Like I could see your husband like getting agitated and like worked up and like changing colors or like, and like, so you brought me along by telling that story, you brought me along on that journey with you, even though I wasn't there in that moment. So I could really like, that's a really powerful way to communicate what needs to be said because and seen, because I now put myself in the story. And I love that, the way that you've articulated that for us.
And one aspect that you just brought up that we haven't even talked about is the use of color and color coding, right? Dorit started with saying, I'm green in this area, green as in new, right? And then she described her husband turning red, right? So how we use color in our conversations is a big part of the visual thinking. In fact, I keep this on my desk, this traffic light, because when I coach my clients, we talk about stop, start, and continue. What's working that you want to continue, what's not working that you need to stop, and what are some things that you want to start. So just having that visual of the traffic light will remind you of, and that's a universal in most cultures technique of communicating, right? The traffic light, we know what it means just from the colors. So thinking about how we can incorporate color coding into our work is a big, into our communications is a big component that we often don't think about.
Now I feel like I need to go get some props for like my everyday conversations, just to like have them ready to go. So
they are more memorable. People don't forget. And you see it because I could say you should really be curious. You should ask why, but you have Curious George. All I have to say to a client is Curious George means don't ask why. Or for clients being really negative and saying, oh, that won't work, I'll say, you're being a dinosaur, right? You're going to go extinct if you don't, So it becomes a shorthand way of communicating. So you can use visual props or you could use the visual language because everyone knows what a dinosaur, everyone will have a different dinosaur pop into their head, but still that metaphor is universal of, you're going to go extinct or, if you're sounding like an old timer, if you don't, when people say, oh, AI, that's not going to stick around, like, dinosaur. So you need to kind of, it's a shorthand way of communicating.
Well, thank you. I'm really going to start thinking about what props I can bring in on a regular basis now. Stina, I'm coming over to you. What's coming up for you as we're talking more about the power of visual leadership?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the guitars behind me, and that was, partly a great use of space in a small, a small house. But I actually had a Zoom call with someone who had guitars behind him, and you can't help but ask someone when there's something behind them to be curious about. So most calls I get on, the first question I get is, oh, do you play guitar? And for a while it was, oh, no, my son and my partner, but now I do play guitar. So I get to share a little bit of that with them. And I've got my paintings back there, and, there's lots of myself reflected visually in the setting. And I got away from the kind of sterile white, professional looking setup, because we're all getting used to being on video in our homes and in cozier environments. And it just adds a little bit more personal touch and connection. So that's something that's been kind of intentional in my Zoom background. And then I was also thinking about I'm a writer, I'm a copywriter, and the words that I put on the page, especially in the case of a website, I'm thinking about visually how this lands. And I think sometimes when we think of writing or we think of words, we think of that as being not visual because it's a written language, but our brains are still processing a literal visual image. And I don't know, Todd, if you have seen, but there's this print that has come out for neurodivergent brains. It's a little bit easier for them to read, where it's heavier font in the beginning of the word and then it lightens up, as the word goes on. And even something like that is a great reminder of how we're intaking just the words on a page. And when something looks more appealing or simpler to read, we're so much more likely to engage with it. And it's proof that design is so important, the way that things are presented visually, and that when they're presented visually well, you actually need to say less in order to get your point across. So if you've ever been somewhere where there's like so many instructions, so many signs, so much to like try and understand, and it's like, it's not designed well, it's not put together in a way that's intuitive for you to engage in that. And I've found that recently with a client I'm doing meeting notes for. I'm taking a coaching call and I'm turning that into an action plan for the client. And my spell checker doesn't like it because I leave out all kinds of unnecessary words and I keep sentences super short, but it's for that comprehension. And so that when you look at a bulleted list, I really try not to go to 2 lines. Your brain doesn't, it's like 2 lines and you're like, oh my God, all of this to read. And when you keep things really short and concise and they're organized well visually, it feels doable. It feels approachable. It feels like something that you can use to get things done. So I think there's just so much power in the communication that we take in visually, simplifying and lightening the load for the rest of the communication we need to do. Because like I always say, the best communication is no communication. So.
Yeah, so many great points. I mean, yeah, the font we use, size, serif versus sans serif, right? Being more aware of neurodivergent people and how they will process, how we each process information. So those are all factors to take into consideration. A friend of mine sent me a copy of his new book. I opened it, has no visuals in it, which is the first thing I look for. And the font size is so small, I'm like, I'm going to need a microscope or magnifying glass to read this. So it's just like right there, that was not very user-friendly if you want to get someone to read your material. So like you're saying, pictures worth 1,000 words is an expression that's been around forever for that reason, right? So less is more is definitely a principle to follow. Think about all the bad PowerPoint slides we see where people just pull up bullet points and then just read to us line by line. By the second line, people either read the whole thing already or they're falling asleep, zoning out, or checking their phones. So in addition to teaching at NYU, I also do faculty development. So I train other professors in how to teach more visually and use experiential learning. And they don't even think about, I'm just boring my students to death by reading off my PowerPoint slides, just the bullet points, as opposed to having a single image with maybe 3 words on it. So if you watch the presentations of Steve Jobs or some of the great presenters, you can see how other people use visuals really effectively. So great point, Stephen.
You can challenge your professors to go, and maybe your students to go do a Pechakucha. I don't know if you've heard of that one. Are you familiar with those? Yeah. What do you get? An image and then 6 seconds to talk about that slide. Yeah. And there's like 20 of them. Stina and I have done that. It's cool. You guys do.
Yeah, it's like anything. It takes the awareness and it takes learning how to do it and it takes practice to do it. But once you do, the impact is tremendous. I'd love to hear from Jenny too before our time runs out.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd, for adding to the conversation. Stina, I love what you were saying about like the written word and like how that can be so visual too. And even the thing made me think of like some of those really bad logos we were recently looking at together of like what was going through those people's minds when they designed these logos. Like what were they thinking? And we could talk about that for hours. I think I'm coming down to Jenny now. What's coming up for you as we talk about the power of visual leadership?
Visual leadership, what's coming in for me is the importance of having a vision. And especially through the pandemic and the circumstances that we're all facing, it's such a challenging time for leaders to share their vision with their teams. And I think something was brought up here that is so super important. Sometimes we have our visions and we feel like we see further. We have our heads up above the clouds and we see further than our people. And what Todd is saying, that yes, we get to have a vision. There's something that we want to share, and we get to keep our feet firmly on the ground and with clarity and connect with our people exactly where they are. So we're not bringing in that toxic positivity. We're bringing in that optimism of meeting them where they're at and shedding our light on the opportunities and the steps that we can take. And as a behavioral scientist, I know we need to see so that we can step into that vision. It's impossible for us to create something in or with our lives or with our business that we're not yet fully seeing. So there's such power in sharing that vision and also joining our people into it. It's that concrete experience of just shared human experience as we're walking through it. So loved having this conversation with you, Todd. Thank you for joining
Great.
us.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, so many leaders try to motivate their people by saying, we're going to increase shareholder value by 3% by the end of this quarter. It's like, that doesn't get people up and out of bed, right? So it's kind of like so many people bore people to death with numbers and data and statistics, as opposed to, I always say the numbers are meaningless outside of their context and outside of the story that they're telling. What's the story you're telling? What's the picture you're painting? What's the vision? So building on what Jenny's saying, right? Your vision is your picture in your head, literally, of what you see as a possibility. And, people are not mind readers. So your job as a leader is to come up with a compelling vision and to be able to communicate that vision effectively so that other people can see it and they're on board with it, they're engaged with it, they're motivated and inspired by it. Otherwise, it's just going to die on the page or become something on a poster in an office wall, but it's not something that actually changes behavior, right? And gets people motivated and inspired to go above, what I call ABCD, above and beyond the call of duty, to turn that vision into a reality.
And people know when we're being sincere.
Yes.
I think that's also why
and we believe it. They believe it too, and they know when we.
Sorry, Jenny, can you say that again? Because I think I cut you off with the delay.
Sorry, yes, there is a delay. I was just saying that we can really tell when our leaders are being sincere. And when a leader sincerely believes in his vision or her vision, we know it, we feel it, we'll follow wherever. So just, yeah, that sometimes takes some inner work and to align with your own vision, and that you are really doing what you align with for your company as well.
That's a powerful way to wrap up. I feel that. I was going to go somewhere else with that, and I feel like that's so complete to make sure that everybody is on board with the vision. Todd, I want to give you the opportunity now to let people know where they can connect with you. Where can they get your book? How can they learn more about what you're doing?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so the best way to start is you just go to my website, toddcherches.com. You can find my TED Talk there, information about my book, as well as the 3 biggest complaints people have about me. So you can find that on my website as well. Go to LinkedIn, say you saw me on the show and on High Vibe Conversations, and just connect with me on LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn, as some of you know, and stay connected, tag me, and we'll continue the conversation there. And my book is available anywhere, especially Amazon, although it's now carried. They just opened a brand new Barnes & Noble 3 blocks from my apartment, and they just got my book in. So I'm going to go over there later on this afternoon and sign a few of the copies and put them back up on the shelf. So that's kind of exciting to have my book at our local New York City neighborhood Barnes & Noble that literally just opened up 2 months ago.
That is really exciting. So if you're in the New York area, please go to Barnes & Noble and grab a copy of Todd's book.
The one on the Upper East Side. I'm not sure if they have it yet in the others. And there's very few real bookstores left, so we need to support them.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're not near a Barnes and Noble that has Todd's book, please feel free to check it out on Amazon. Make sure to check out his website and connect with him on LinkedIn. Please connect with us as well. We'd love to hear from you if we're not already connected. We'd love to be. We want to know what high vibe conversations you're resonating with, what high vibe conversations you want to have more of, or that topics that we haven't even touched yet. So if you want to catch up on previous conversations or just be notified when more are coming your way, please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel seen on your screen. And if you'd like to continue a high vibe conversation more privately, we invite you to do so by booking in with one of our lovely high vibe ladies here. And this is the link where you can schedule your individual conversation. We want to thank you for joining us once again. Please stay tuned for more high vibe conversations coming your way. And until then, we will say bye for now.